Is there any way that Israel could be conducting themselves in a way that is not killing so many people? Like, is that a fair question to ask?
It is, but anyone with a little military experience would tell you that maybe you shouldn't be watching so much news.
No,
And
but it's 40. It's a lot of people. It's a lot of people.
okay, have you corroborated that number is correct?
I've
You know
looked
that
at
as a
every
fact?
news source. Unless the world is lying to me, I mean, every single news.
But news sources get their information from one place.
But I'm saying
The
every
Gazan
single
officials.
Israel.
Listen,
It's an Israel source. Israel says that's the number.
my understanding is Israel has never corroborated that number.
So,
And
but you don't
they
believe any
challenge that.
number? Well, what
No,
number do you
no,
believe?
no.
What should I
What
look
happens
at?
if you?
So, who do I believe? You? I mean, who are we supposed to believe?
Anyway, I don't necessarily believe it. You don't. You believe whoever you want to
But
believe.
what number do you believe? What number do you believe, and where do you get the number? All right, Rabbi Simon Jacobson, thank you so much for joining me today on my podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I'd love to talk to you today about the war that Israel is in and also about religion and the Torah. So let me start with Israel. What is your take on what's going on? You know, what's your feeling about, is Israel doing the right thing? Are they doing the wrong thing? What would you like to see happen?
You're talking about almost thousands of years of history in a nutshell. What shall I say? So let me put it this way. Number one, my heart, like all of us, bleeds and cries for innocent lives lost, starting with October 7th, over 1,200 innocent men, women, and children, atrocities perpetrated in the worst possible way. People have already pointed out the worst single day since the Holocaust for Jews, for the killing of Jews. But I will tell you also, my heart also breaks for every innocent Muslim man, woman, or child, or Palestinian, whatever the name you give, because as a Jew and as a human being, we are sensitive to all life. God created all human beings. So whenever you see death, and especially death that was not necessary at all, I mean, not that there is a necessary death, but a death that's really brought on by human actions, it has to be devastating. But sadly, but also in a way powerfully, the Jewish people have been here before. You know, it's not the first time we've been persecuted. It's not the first time we've been attacked. You go back to the Egyptians in biblical times. You go through the Babylonians and the Romans and the Assyrians and the Greeks and the Syrians and then the Ottomans. I mean, of course, the Holocaust and the Nazis. I mean, the list goes on. So I think the first thing, after speaking about the personal feelings I have about what's going on, is we need to learn from our history, from the things we did that were right, and also from our mistakes. So I think, for especially for a Jew, and I speak as a Jew right now, we always worship and embrace life. We want life. We want peace. That has always been our aspiration. Shalom in Hebrew is the greatest blessing of all. There's no greater blessing than the blessing of harmony, tranquility, and peace with your neighbors, with your friends, with strangers, with everyone. The question is, how do you achieve peace? Especially when you have people or a community, or more than a community, a country that has declared war on you. If you have Iran calling for the annihilation of the Jewish people and of Israel, if you have Hamas in their constitution calling for that, and since 1948, you have literally countries that have declared war on Israel. What do you do? So obviously, you can't just wait to be massacred, God forbid. So the best defense sometimes is offense. You have to have a strong army, a strong military to protect yourself and protect the innocent. But at the same time, in a longer term picture, the question is, how do we solve this, not just by eliminating the immediate threat, but in a longer term way? That's where I have a lot to say. I think that you cannot negotiate with someone that calls for your annihilation. Only out of strength. Peace will be achieved only through strength. Had the Allies negotiated with the Nazis or with the Japanese with some type of conditional surrender or ceasefire in the middle of World War II, it would have created far more problems. There had to be a complete victory, a complete unconditional surrender from the enemy, and then the victor dictates the terms, And today, Germany and Japan are allies with the United States and with the free Western world. And I believe the same thing has to happen. Anyone that is calling for your destruction, that's you have to be able to negotiate out of strength. I think the negotiations that come from weakness and allowing there to be a moral equivalence between people who are calling for your death and you're defending yourself is a tremendous mistake. And I think Israel sometimes is guilty of being its own worst enemy, to be very frank. And it's not because I'm hawkish or because I like war. I just know that sometimes you have to do what has to be done out of strength, and then you can achieve true peace, lasting peace. So that's my overall comment. Obviously, I can go into more detail, but I don't want to over elaborate.
No, I appreciate your answering that and providing your perspective. And I want to say that I appreciate the first thing you said, which is that you feel compassion for the Palestinian civilians who've been killed. I think that was one of the first things you said. I don't always hear that from everyone I talk to. Let's just say that. And it's really disturbing when I don't. And I think that, I'm not a military strategist. I don't really understand appeasement when it works and when it doesn't. So I don't know what Israel should have done or what they should do or what other. But I think what I do know is that we should all be able to easily, quickly condemn Hamas and feel a lot of tragedy and sympathy for the civilians who have died. And it seems so obvious, but that not everyone is able to hold both ideas in their head at once. So I think that's
Correct. And
important.
you have to keep in mind one more thing, because the enemy uses civilians to try to protect themselves. So that's why I think some people are very wary. It would be like, you know how many civilians died during World War II? You know how many people died in Japan when it was bombed? We have to cry for any innocent civilian. The question, who is killing the civilians? Is it the Israelis or is it the Hamas in their own cynicism that they want? Part of their strategy is to use civilians. So they don't have no problem martyring their own children for their cause. And that's a major,
if we're going to be literal, I mean, is it the Hamas bullet or bomb that's killing the Palestinian civilians?
It was the American atom bomb that killed the Japanese. But
Yeah.
there was a reason why they had to drop the bomb.
I'm not talking about the reason. I'm just saying, and I don't want to have you walk back from what you said at the beginning, which I think you meant, which is that you feel bad for the civilians, and let's
but just to be clear, because
yeah.
I don't want to be misunderstood. For
Sure.
me, because I feel bad for the civilians in Gaza, that's why I think Hamas has to be completely, utterly destroyed.
Yeah. Well, it's a kind of a bit of a catch-22, I guess, because yes, they're using civilian shields, but then when Israel bombs or shoots at Hamas and it necessarily hits a civilian, it doesn't. So that for them to say, "Well, we had no choice. You're using civilian shields." I mean, you do have a choice. Israel does have agency, and
Okay, well, we may respectfully disagree about that.
yeah. Well, I guess what my point is that the comment about civilian shields, we agree. And so therefore we both agree that in order for Israel to attack Hamas, because Hamas uses civilian shields, therefore Israel has to kill civilians if they want to attack Hamas, right?
Well, just like they had to kill civilians during World War II because the Nazis were embedded within Germany,
and we should feel bad. And we should feel bad for German civilians.
So that's why I opened my remarks. But at the same time, I think it's Hamas that is hurting their own children more than anybody else. Like Golda Meir said, that when they will love their children more than they hate us, we will have real peace. Let me put it to you this way. Why doesn't Hamas simply surrender, give up all the hostages, and there will be no more killing of any civilians? Why is nobody calling them to do that?
I think plenty of people condemn Hamas. I think
no, but I just said to you, you want to end this. It's very simple. You want to stop the killing of civilians, simply surrender, throw out the white flag, give up the hostages, and stop calling for the destruction of Israel. Anyway, I think I made my point. And
I think the point that's important to me is that however they died, whoever killed them, that we feel bad that they died. And I think that point is unfortunately lost a lot of times because people are fixated on the idea that the war has to happen. And I think whether or not the war has to happen is a separate point from whether we feel bad for people dying. And I think what you said at the beginning is that one of the first things you said is we feel, I just think
Yeah, but
it's so
I don't want
important.
it to be misunderstood because the people who say that often have very different intentions than I had.
Hmm.
That's why I'm clarifying
What was your intention in saying that?
that this Hamas has to be utterly destroyed because they have
Yeah.
brought 40,000 of their own civilians to such a
Yeah.
circumstances.
And we feel bad for those civilians,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, but I have a conclusion.
But both could
Whereas
be
other
true. You
people's
can
conclusion is
Yeah.
that Israel's at fault and Israel should be condemned.
Yeah.
That's where I differ.
Well, it's a complicated. I mean, you're not a military strategist. You're a rabbi. That's the other thing. Asking you these questions, like this is not your area of expertise, right? It's the Torah, which is separate from military warfare. But I wanted to ask you regardless. But
But
I think,
military strategy is not a mystery. There's a logic to it. There's common sense. If somebody came, God forbid, attacked your family in your home, you wouldn't go call someone that's a military strategist. You would
the
do
the
everything to
different
protect your children, right?
the difference here is that the relationship between Gaza and Israel is such that Israel, and you can say this is for security measures. I won't debate you on that, but Israel has, as you know, had Gaza under a blockade since they left Gaza in 2007. And so Gaza, as you know, is not a very nice place to live, in large part because of Hamas. That's one big reason. Another reason that I think that Netanyahu would agree with this is that Israel has needed to block weapons from getting into Gaza for their security. And who's going to dispute that? But when they block weapons and they have this blockade, it also unfortunately can make it harder for them to get food and to build their houses. And
Yeah,
it, it
but you missed maybe the biggest one.
yeah.
Had the Arab world in 1948 not declared war on Israel and called for its annihilation, we wouldn't have these problems in the first place. You ever think of
But
that?
but here we are. I mean,
Israel has never called. Israel doesn't have
yeah.
anything in its constitution calling for the destruction of the Arab or Muslim community.
Well, I mean, Benny Morris, the Israeli historian, even him who's pro-Israeli, kind of points out that there's components of Zionism, which in Herzl's diary, for example, which talk about expulsion of Palestinians. So the Arabs in the area had they were worried that Israel would end up taking over their land, and maybe it was an irrational fear, but without going back to 1948, look, all I want to say is that the relationship between Israel and Gaza is such that life in Gaza is not that pleasant, and the idea that there's other ways, Israel has other levers to create peace. I think. Like, would you agree that?
I may not agree with you. So
Yeah,
just maybe you
yeah.
want to end it here because I may
Oh,
actually adamantly disagree with you
okay.
if you want to go there. And I have a case to be made, but I don't know if that's
Yeah.
where you want to go.
I do think there are people I think Israel's torn, right? There's a lot of people who oppose Netanyahu.
I don't think this has nothing to do with Netanyahu.
Yeah,
In 1948 was not Netanyahu wasn't even was he even born? I don't even know if he was born yet.
yeah. Well,
I don't think
so let
this
me.
is I don't think this is a Netanyahu issue. I think it's a problem that the Muslim, especially the more extreme Muslim, have with Israel and that part of the world. I think they have
But
a
what
problem.
they've
They have a
done,
problem with the
it's.
West as well.
But
But
I care.
they call the. I don't know if you're familiar with the ideology of Muslim fundamentalism. Have you ever read about it? I have
And I
done
know a bit.
extensive research,
Yeah,
so I know where the ideology comes from. There's an
hmm,
ideology behind this. It's not just
yeah,
wanton killing. There's an
yeah.
ideology.
9 months ago, Israel had a good status in the world, and now half the world hates Israel because of their actions in Gaza. They haven't killed Hamas. It seems like all of Israel's. It's sad. I wish that Israel
Well, okay, so look.
didn't have Israel.
If I have plenty to say about this. If you want to
Yeah.
go there, I'm happy to dedicate all the time to discuss this.
Well,
But I have a very different take than you do on it, and that's all. That's fine, which is
so
fine. I have
how?
no problem.
Well, so here's where you and I would agree. Like, you and I both care about Israel's stature in the world, right? And when I see
Well,
what's
not
happened
at the
to.
expense of the risk of their own lives. You know.
Right, but I mean, I'm upset that Israel's reputation has gone down the drain a little bit.
Well,
Like, I wish it hadn't.
I'm a little older than you. Do you think that
Yeah.
anti-Semitism was caused by Israel?
No.
Right. You think that when the Nazis killed 6 million Jews, who would you blame for that? The Jews as well?
No, but when do we give when should we look at Israel's actions, look at the response, and attribute anything other than anti-Semitism? I guess my question is like we have to be able to criticize Israel, right? It's not fair to always say that any criticism of Israel is anti-Semitism. That doesn't seem right to me, right? Like any country makes mistakes. America makes mistakes. France makes mistakes. Certainly, Israel's not perfect, right?
Did the Allies make mistake when they fought Germans and Japanese?
No, they didn't.
Yes, they did. They made
Oh,
mistakes.
they did. They did. Yeah,
Of
yeah,
course,
they did.
in
They did.
every
Yeah,
military, you make mistakes. The question is,
yeah,
why are you focusing on the mistakes of the Allies when you're busy fighting people, fascists and Nazis, who want to destroy so many innocent people? To
yeah.
me, it's out of context.
Okay,
If me and my family are attacked, I don't want to hear about mistakes I make. I want to hear about these attacks because
fair.
you're also dealing with a propaganda war. Are you aware of that? A propaganda war with entire alternative narratives. So
Yeah.
I'm actually, this is part of the business I'm in, is
Mm,
to fight the media war, so to speak, the information
mm,
war, because there are all kinds of alternative narratives that are being posited out there that are just simply false. This doesn't mean
mm,
Israel hasn't made mistakes, but to
mm.
me, you have to be very careful when you start using that card because when you are, as I said, if the Arab world would be at peace with the fact that Israel is a state to stay, and they would completely accept that, just as the UAE and the Emirates and Kuwait and the other countries that made peace with Israel, you think there'd be a war now?
Um, I, I don't know. I don't know.
Well, that to
Huh.
me is a big part of the issue. They have to come to terms that the Jews and Israel are not going
Yeah,
anywhere. They come to
definitely.
terms with that, you have a good beginning. It's very hard to negotiate peace with someone who's calling for your
Yeah,
destruction and blames you because you've put them into, like you call it, some people call it the Gaza concentration camp, or they
I don't
call
call
it
it. No,
other
no.
names.
So I'm just stating a fact that um, Gaza is not a very nice place to be, right? It's that you could say it's their own fault, but it's still a fact. Like it's not a nice place to be. They're not happy there. The unemployment's been very high. Again, you can say it's all Hamas's fault. I'm not concerned with the causes. I'm just
Like, why don't you hear anybody calling the Arab world and the Muslim world? Where's their compassion? When 1 million Jews were expelled from the Muslim countries around 1948,
they should be
Israel,
compassionate, but
as
but
Israel took them in. Why are these people who are suffering, these men, women, and children
yeah,
in Gaza, or wherever they may be, where
yeah.
their brothers and cousins
Why don't
compassionate?
other countries take them in? What do you mean? What?
Yeah, why don't they take them in? If this is a place that's
I don't.
impossible to live because it's unbearable because Hamas controls it or whatever, why don't you
Yeah,
take them in
I
and
don't know if it's that easy to take in
protect
two
your
million
young?
refugees. I don't think it's that easy to take in 2 million refugees. It would probably cause economic stress.
You think that's the problem because of economic stress?
No, I'm saying taking in 2 million refugees would not. Countries don't want to do that. I would have to imagine. But I so let
Well, there may be other agendas.
yeah.
Consider that.
Yeah, yeah. I here, let me move on to topics of the Torah. Look, and maybe a pause here for a second. I don't want to frustrate you. What I want to push people on, and um, I want to believe that people can criticize Israel and not be anti-Semitic. I don't want to live in a world where everyone who says anything negative about Israel is necessarily anti-Semitic. That doesn't seem good for Judaism. We have to be able to make like Israel. We have to give agency to the IDF and the government, and to be able to say like I disagree with that, and not have it be anti-Semitic. Otherwise, they're beyond condemnation, and then it doesn't seem fair to me. So, yeah, I don't mean to upset you. Look, I spoke with another person the other week who wouldn't even say that it's a tragedy when civilians die. I think that's just a bare minimum that people should align on. Look, I want to tell you what's underneath this for me. It's not a hatred of Israel, right? I see the way the world has reacted towards Israel. I know that part of that is anti-Semitism, but I also wonder, like, I can't every time someone has something negative to say about Israel, if I always assume it's
Let me ask you,
anti-Semitism.
had Israel not reacted to October 7th and the world would not have condemned Israel, then you would have been happy?
No, I'm not happy. Nothing. What makes me happy is Israel being safe, and I don't know. I'm not a strategist, but
That's what the world. But that's what the world began to condemn Israel's reaction from day one, if you recall. It just took time till
yeah,
it became more popular, so to speak. Anyway, I'm of a big believer, like Menachem Begin said.
mhm.
When you believe in something, I don't really care whether it's popular or not.
Yeah,
You
that
know,
makes
if
sense.
the Jewish people would consider public opinion, we wouldn't be here today,
Yeah,
because public opinion felt that the Jews should be disappear a long time ago. So
yeah,
I don't know how much I give value to what the world thinks or doesn't think. You know, the UN, by majority, just look at their condemnation,
yeah.
are disproportionate about Israel. Let me ask you something. Where's there?
And then,
Why is there no equal amount of talk about the Sudanese that have massacred, the
well,
Syrian,
okay,
the Syrian? How come there's no talk about that?
yeah.
How come there are no protests
I,
in this country?
what about Sudan? What about these other countries? Maybe it is the case that the media is more fixated on Israel than they should be, or they're not fixated on other countries. But if I say to you,
But I'll
hey, I
throw out
have
one
a
more thing. That do you know how much money has been spent by Qatar and by other Arab countries and Muslim countries on PR to push this agenda in the media and in Hollywood and the campuses in the United States? You don't know, do you?
yeah.
I
I
come
guess
from the world of media.
is there?
I
I
know.
mean, but smart Jewish Israeli people disagree on the right approach. Some people say, hey, they should have been more aggressive in Gaza. And some people say Israel should have focused more on a prisoner exchange up front and less on
The issue
bombing
doesn't
Hamas.
begin
I don't
with
know the
Gaza.
answer.
We all know the issue doesn't begin with Gaza. The issue begins with the hatred that precedes Gaza. Gaza is just
Yeah.
a symptom of a problem, not the cause.
People in Gaza feel restricted by the blockade, and they're really angry at Israel for the blockade, even though Israel's doing the blockade to stop Hamas. For an ordinary person, civilian living in Gaza, your life is kind of miserable and you have a hard time getting resources, and it's Hamas's fault. But the country that is preventing the resources getting in, it is Israel. I think we should accept like Israel has to do things for its security, and those security measures sometimes cause a hardship on other people. I'm just saying, like it has an effect. Um,
Well, I
maybe,
like I like to think of solutions, not the problems. What are
yeah.
the solutions? And
Well, a solution would be
I
live.
believe I do have some thoughts on the solutions. That's where I was
What
addressing.
would the solution be?
You have to get rid of the hatred of calling for the destruction of Israel. Without that, I wouldn't even go to the table with someone that calls for my destruction. I don't care what their excuse is.
Mm-hmm.
If they want my attention, they need to give me at least the respect that they don't want to kill me and my family. That's the first thing of all. And that goes back many years, long before Gaza, long before October 7th. You have to begin with a place where someone recognizes that you have the right to exist and doesn't call for your annihilation. I mean, Hamas says clearly, we are not satisfied with peace. We want control of all of Israel. We just can't have it because because Israel has more military might. That's their only problem. So you need to have someone who accepts that you have a right to exist. They don't feel that Israel has a right to exist. That's why they went to war in 1948. Why didn't they accept the partition and just establish an Arab state side by side with Israel? There's a reason, because they didn't accept it. They just wouldn't accept that Israel has a right
Yeah,
to exist. To me,
that's right.
that's a critical thing. You have to begin with that point. They can't. How can you negotiate when two companies want to merge? They have to recognize each of them has some
Yeah,
value.
I think they didn't want to merge initially. I think Palestine said, "Why should we give up our land?"
Yeah, I understand. But you know
But
what?
hey,
There
we're
are
here. Yeah.
consequences for these decisions.
There's what?
There are consequences when you make such a decision.
Yeah. Well, I think they didn't want to. I mean, I'm not saying they were in the right, but I think they didn't want to give up their land because they said, "Why should we do this? We're living here."
And maybe some of them still feel the same way.
Yeah. So, what? Uh, yeah.
By the way, just
when
for the
should we?
record, this is nothing personal here.
Yeah.
I'm speaking to you passionately about my
Yes.
understanding.
Yeah.
This is not a. I
No, no.
don't
Well,
take this
I don't want to. I don't want to be offensive to you or say anything that that kind of cuts at your core beliefs. That's not my intention either. But let me ask you something sort of adjacent. Is like, when should we be critical of
Well, no,
Israel?
you have to remember, I'm a believer that if you do the right thing, everyone will be happy.
Yeah.
Both Jews and Arabs and Palestinians and Muslims. I don't
Yeah.
believe in a win-lose situation. I think it's win-win for everybody.
Hmm.
That's my attention here. I'm not looking that the Jews win over the Arabs. That's not my thinking. My thinking, if
Hmm.
you do the right thing, that's why I mentioned Germany and Japan today are thriving economies, thriving
Hmm.
countries, and they live at peace with the world. That's
Yeah.
what I'm thinking, that you want to have ultimately that everybody's be happy.
When should we criticize Israel? Like, let's say in 20 years, there's some bad person that gets into office at Israel, and this person is doing things that are damaging the country. At that point, should we stand up on behalf of Israel and Jews and say, hey, we're not happy with what's happening, and we love Israel, and we want the government to do something different? Like, is there a place and time when, for the benefit of Jews in Israel, we can criticize or condemn Israel's actions? Like, is that ever appropriate?
Well, let me tell you something. You know who instituted disagreements in the world? It was the Jews. The Jews have been arguing since the beginning of time. It was the monarchies and the church and the Muslim countries that don't allow dissent. Is there dissent in Saudi Arabia, in Syria, in Jordan, in Iran, in Iraq? So the Jews have always had dissent. You open up a Talmud, you'll find constant disagreements. The Jews have always criticized each other, but they never personalized it. And they never did it like tyrants.
Yeah.
So there's always room for that. The problem is when the world, who have their own agendas and come to say, hey, why don't you condemn your own? I don't trust everyone who tells me I have disagreements with my own family.
So can I criticize Israel? Like, can you accept my
Anyone
criticism?
can, but if you do it in the wrong context, it'll become suspicious. Maybe that you're just another bought into a propaganda machine.
So what criticism would you accept of Israel?
At this point, I wouldn't be busy with criticizing Israel. I'd be busy.
So you're not, but you just
let me finish the sentence. I'd be busy. Let's personalize it. You and I are friends. You call me up and you tell me that my neighbor next door, God forbid, broke into my house and is killing my family.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll say to you, you know what? You made some mistakes. And no, now's not a time for me to condemn you. Now's a time for me to to defend you.
Yeah.
And let's get rid of the enemy first, and then we'll go back and discuss our mistake and so on. So everything is fine.
I like that analogy. So by that analogy.
By the way, let me ask you something. I want to throw this out to you.
Yeah.
You're a military person.
Okay.
And you disagree with your commander in chief or with your general or with your sergeant and lieutenant.
Mm-hmm.
But right now you're fighting a war. Do you have a right to do something that will be some form of mutiny against your superior, even if you disagree with them?
No.
Right? Because you're in the middle of a war. It's
right.
like two doctors in a surgery room. Now we have to save a life. Yeah. Then afterwards you can sit and argue about it. And by all means, there's a free elections. If people disagree with the leader in Israel, let them vote him out and vote in who they want.
Yeah.
And it's open debate. So I think we always have a right to criticize.
So can I ask you about that analogy? If someone breaks into your home and kills someone, and then you have to chase them, at what point? So you chase them out of your home. Hamas hasn't been killing Israelis, I think, since October 7th. Is that true?
It's not true. They've been shooting rockets. I think their numbers constantly. They just didn't do it to that level. But they've attempted to. I don't know if you remember a few years ago, Passover, there was almost an attack of the same nature, but they stopped it. They caught it in time.
Yeah.
Because remember, Hamas's constitution calls for the destruction of Israel. So it's not a surprise to me.
I thought
I'm not surprised by October 7th at all.
Yeah.
I'm actually surprised they didn't pull it off earlier.
Yeah. Well, thank God they haven't killed anyone in Israel since October 7th. Right?
That's not because they don't want to. That's because they can't.
Yeah. Can I shift topics? How do we know the Torah is
Iran
true?
in April shot 300 drones and missiles. What was exactly their motive? What is bothering them? They're not living in Gaza.
That's right. That's Iran. Yeah, I think it's a very complicated issue. There's Iran, there's
And they say
Hezbollah,
that
there's
all these are
Hamas.
proxies. That's all really Iran anyway.
Yeah.
The Hamas is not even about Iran is having the others do dirty work for them.
I think what makes it complicated for me is that Iran has no reason to attack Israel other than hatred of Israel and Jews, right? I
No,
agree.
no, no. They'll say they're
But
protecting Gazans. They can't stand that Gazan civilians are being killed. That's what they'll say.
yeah.
If I was their PR person, that's what I would say because it sounds so nice. It sounds so compassionate that they're protecting the Gazan civilians, and that's why they are attacking because Israel is the aggressor. Uh, that's their party line, whatever.
I don't know about aggressor. In the Gaza-Israel war, you could say in terms of body count, Israel's winning, right? They're 40,000 to 2,000 maybe or something.
Even if Israel, the problem is that even if Israel eradicates Hamas, the problem
Mm.
is not over. The hatred
Mm.
is still there. Of
So
course,
the
there's
more
going to
they
be tremendous resentment. The problem, as I said before, these are symptoms. Even if Israel
yeah.
wins outright, we still
Okay.
don't have the problem solved because how much resentment was created. How many families in Gaza are even angrier at Israel than ever before?
So
I
what do you do?
explained.
Kill 'em? So, but isn't that a problem? You see, like I think I agree with
That's
you on
why
that.
I go back to the root of the issue. Do you know the history of Christianity? How many Jews were killed by Christians over history
Hundreds
before?
of thousands, right? A lot.
Yeah, if not
Crusades, a lot.
millions. Yeah.
Hmm.
At some point, Christianity got itself tamed, and they
Yeah.
lost their bite, and they established a country like United States and other Western
Yeah.
countries where they offered freedom of religion and freedom and minorities
Yeah.
and the freedoms that we today cherish. I
Hmm.
think the Muslim world is going to have to go through an equal type of market correction, if you
But
ask me.
isn't it creating more hate, like you said, all the people they've killed in Gaza?
Yeah, but the solution is what? Is not to defend yourself. The solution is to transform the Muslim
Yeah.
world and say, listen, you're angry. We're also angry. 6 million of Jews were killed, but we didn't go back to Germany and rape their women and burn their children. We built a country, and if you want to get your way, you have to learn that violence is not the way. The way is through other means. So the Arab and Muslim world that is angry needs to find a way to vent that anger in different ways. That violence and a nuclear bomb is not going to be the solution. But
Yeah.
this is a big discussion. As you said, it's more than military strategy. I think it's also ideology. You have to get to the heart and the root of the problem. I do not
Yeah.
believe if Israel stops defending itself, the problem will go away either. It'll make the problem worse, frankly.
Hmm. I've spoken to Alon Pepe, who is a famous pro-Palestinian Israeli author who believes that Israel has never wanted peace, and I can't seem to understand
I
the
know
two
that narrative.
narratives of
I'm familiar with the narrative.
yeah
I've been on programs where I was pitted against someone that had the exact opposite narrative that I have, who
yeah
believes that Israel is completely the aggressor and that
hmm
Israel is the colonial
well
apartheid genocide nation.
hmm
I've had conversations like this with people. In most cases, you don't get very far because it's just two different narratives. It's like
yeah.
ships in the night.
What do you think people like that are missing? Like a historian like Alon Pepe, who's Jewish Israeli, dedicated his life to understanding the history. Is
Uh,
he anti-Semitic or is he just
I think it's a
misreading?
combination of several factors.
Uh-huh.
I think it's a combination. I don't think it's only I think it's more complex than that. I
Hmm.
think there's firstly there's an ideological foundation that Muslim fundamentalists believe that God chose them over the
Mm. I'm
Christians
I'm
and the
talking about
Jews.
Jewish Israeli historians like Noam Chomsky, Norman Finkelstein, Avi Schlein, Alon Pepe. Um,
Well, some of them,
these are
honestly, to me, they're like capos. They're like
yeah.
pro-Nazi. I
Have you
don't,
read their books? Have you read their books or read their?
I have. I've read their
Yeah,
books and
'cause
I've heard them
is
speak.
there anything you disagree with that they've said specifically?
Everything I disagree with.
But they
I
recount
think,
so I'm just saying that they have
to
their
me,
version of history and these events happen.
I don't. To me, it's like there are Jewish anti-Semites, and they're like
Hmm.
Jewish anti-Semites in my view. I don't
Hmm.
know. I don't know. I don't know their lives and their history. Maybe they were abused when they were children. I don't know what it is, but
Mm.
it doesn't sound. I don't find anything. They never say anything positive about Israel or Jews. You mentioned before, do we have the right to condemn? I never hear them say anything positive about Jews or Israel. Have you ever heard anything positive?
Yeah, I think that
Chomsky, Finkelstein, they've said something positive about Jews and Israel?
I don't know, but
I
they're not
challenge you
making.
to tell me one positive thing they've ever said.
I'm saying they're historians, and so they're looking for
I don't
facts
care
and
what
evidence
title they
and
have. You
detail.
know what? There were German doctors that performed experiments, MDs, PhDs, who performed experiments on little children. So what? Just because they have a PhD on their name doesn't make them morally desirable people.
Yeah.
I'm not
No, I would.
impressed by titles, so I don't care
Yeah.
if they're called historians.
Yeah.
You know,
No, there just seems like their recounting of history is completely different from a
but
lot,
but Noam
another
Chomsky
person.
says America is a Nazi state.
Right. So you can
I
see
mean,
his
once you
fallacy
sit
and
down,
reasoning.
you know what? He unfortunately, and I don't wish it upon him. Had he lived under the Nazis, he probably learned what a Nazi state is. He never lived under.
Yeah.
He lived in democracy where he can say whatever he wants. You know,
Mm. He
if he
called
actually
America a
lived,
Nazi state. I didn't realize that.
yeah,
Hmm.
he said. I heard him once say that they're worse than global. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't get these guys, and frankly, it's not my problem. They have
Hmm.
to defend themselves. I don't have to explain them away.
That's
I
right.
find them to be something very distorted there. I have no problem with critique of Jews or critique of Israel, but I do have a problem when somebody is just completely has their own distorted version.
Yeah.
I don't know where it comes from even.
It's yeah. That makes sense. Can I ask you about the Torah? How do we know
Like
the
Noam
Torah is?
Chomsky and Norman Finkelstein and Mate and others were
Mhm,
October 7th at the music festival, the Nova Music Festival. What do you think would have
mhm.
happened with them?
They would have been killed. Yeah.
Of course, you think someone would say, "Oh, Noam Chomsky, he's pro me." So I don't understand that. That to me is very doesn't make sense to me.
To me, reading some of their stuff, it seems like their read on history. They think that uh, that they talk about things like the Nakba, and they say, hey, there's two sides to the story. There's
I don't
this
know.
narrative where you see
I mean,
Palestinian stuff.
the only way I could speak about them is that they visited Gaza and they saw the squalid and difficult conditions
Hmm.
that the Gazans live in, and maybe that's their narrative is based on that. But
Hmm.
there's context. There's always context.
Yeah. Like Hamas that created the squalor.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't explain these guys.
Yeah. Nor do you have to. So how do you answer when someone says, Rabbi Jacobson, how do you know the Torah is true?
You know what? Since it's a good segue, is when I see these guys, that's what tells me the Torah is true because they create their own morality. To me, one of the beautiful things about Torah and Judaism is that it provided a objective moral, we'll call it
Mhm,
standard. That when
mhm,
when when Abraham, the biblical Abraham, came on the scene, what was he doing? He grew up in a home of pagans, of idol worshippers. His father was an idol manufacturer. And he came to realize that he lived in a society where power and control was dominated by one individual. Nimrod was then the dictator, the tyrant. And Abraham came to realize through his own intelligence and his own search that morality cannot be defined by any one individual because we're all subjective. If I was, when they say that power corrupts and absolute power absolutely corrupts. So he understood that self-interest cannot be the driving force of a healthy society. And he came to realize there has to be a higher standard. And as such, he came to realize that there is a divine law, let's call it that, which is really the essence of what Torah ultimately is. It's a divine law that does not say, not I and not you. And actually, the founding fathers of this country embraced it when they said, we hold these truths to be self evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by the Creator with unalienable rights. This is taken straight from the Bible, that we're all equal in the eyes of the Creator. So I would say the single most important message the Torah tells us is that every human being on earth, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, atheist, agnostic, it makes no difference. 8 billion people on this earth, created by God in the divine image and have a divine mission to fulfill. When I first began to appreciate Torah, that message, I realized that is a universal truth that just resonates. Do I have absolute scientific proof of Sinai that I could say I remember that God gave the Torah to the people? To me, that doesn't matter. To me, it's experiential proof that that truth is what creates a healthy society. And it
Got it.
took actually the founding fathers. It's only 250 years old, the United States. But before that, as you know, who ruled the world? Monarchs, the church, individuals. If they were benevolent, we could thank God. If they weren't, in most cases they weren't, everyone suffered. They had absolute power. So the fact that that principle created a society of freedom, that you have the freedom of expression. Even here, we can have this disagreement or no disagreement, doesn't matter. Let's say even if we agree, we can have a conversation and we're not going to be excommunicated or executed for our opinions. That to me is fundamentally Torah thinking. So that to me is a resonating truth that is undeniable.
Mm.
Now, I understand that many people have had very bad experiences with Torah and with Judaism, either experiencing a punitive God, punishment, abuse, the Woody Allen version. So I deal with people all the time. So I know many people have been turned off by Judaism.
What's the Woody Allen version?
The Woody Allen version is it's almost like a joke. Woody Allen, the classic Woody Allen joke is where the open-minded niece is sitting at a Seder table and she says to her pious grandfather, she says, "Grandpa, you're such a religious fanatic." And he says, "What do you mean?" She says, "If you had to choose between God and the truth, which would you choose?" You hear, between God and the truth. And without missing a beat, he says God. This is a Woody Allen type of cynical. In other words, God and truth have nothing to do with each other necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
I really appreciate your answer about you
so
believe in
I
it.
look at it more like that unfortunately, like anything, religion can be hijacked and can be abused and can be distorted. But the Torah I've come to learn is a Torah that has these values that I'm describing that to me are the foundation of a healthy home, a healthy community, a healthy world.
I really appreciate your answer that what I heard was that the Torah is true experientially. I think you said, you can't prove it scientifically, you weren't there at Sinai, but the meaning and the purpose of it is true to you
Well, my soul
because of
was
what
there. That's what it says in the books, but I can't
yeah,
say I have conscious
right.
memory.
But you're not attempting, because I'll be honest, personally, one of my, I guess, frustrations with some conversations I've had is people who are trying to make the case that we can, like, epistemically or scientifically prove that the Torah is true, because how else could it be that this story was passed on from Sinai, or that the Torah predicted this or that, or that there's the Bible codes. And I think when you try to deduce the validity of the Torah to a series of proofs, it's not fair, because that's not, you can't prove it scientifically, nor should we. You
Correct.
can,
Look,
yeah.
one of the classic proofs is like no building on earth built itself. No piece of art painted itself. There's no piece of music that wasn't composed by a composer. No book that was not written by an author. So the argument goes that this beautiful designed world, which is more sophisticated and more complex than any organism and than any art or work of art or book or music, how could you say that there isn't a designer, a cosmic designer?
Hmm.
That is one of the proofs given. So let me respond. Let me just comment on that. So the truth is, I, as a skeptic, would always say, well, is that a true proof or not? The truth
Oh,
is, it sounds like a very good proof. Why, if I said to you that this computer that you're on and I am on, this technology created itself, it evolved by accident,
yeah.
natural selection, you'd look at me like I'm crazy. Of course, some engineer built this.
Right.
It's too organized. So when it comes to, so this is a classic explain, but yet you see millions of people who call themselves atheists or agnostics who don't accept the proof.
Well,
So
let's say
my
I believe in God as a creator, but how do you know the Torah is true? How do you know
okay,
the
fine, fine.
Torah is from God? Yeah.
Okay, I went back to God. I'll get to that in a moment. Let me just talk about God for a moment. So, but there are many people who deny that God exists. They'll say, no, no, that's not a proof. And the fact that they could even make that argument tells me that maybe God himself created an agnostic universe where he concealed his presence. Christopher Hitchens, who I'm sure you heard of, who wrote a book, God is Not Great. He's considered, he passed away a few years ago. He's considered one of the radical atheists. You know, his mother was Jewish. Only a Jew can be such a good atheist, you know. So they asked him before he died. I think he died of what was it? Maybe throat cancer. I mean, unfortunately, he died young. So they asked him, "But what happens if you come up to heaven and you find out there is a God?" So his response was interesting. He said, "I will ask God, why did you conceal yourself so well?" That was his response. Okay, let me get to what you said. The general argument is like this: that if a God, a designer, created the world, so think of it, let's just use that analogy. So if it's like an engineer created a machine, it makes sense that he would give us an operator's manual how to use that machine. So that's the case for Torah. The Torah is that operator's manual. You could still argue, how do you know it's the Torah and not the New Testament and not the Quran and not some other sacred or books? But the idea that God has a plan for the world and he communicated that plan seems to be logical if you do accept that there's a cosmic designer. But again, to me,
Wait,
it's
why?
cool.
I'm sorry, I'm not following. Why? Why would we assume he gives us a manual or
Well,
a guidebook?
because design means purpose. It would be like me giving you a computer, but I don't give you a manual how to use it. So it's like God giving us life and creating all this with a plan, but
So
he
he
never
must
tells
have
us.
given a.
He must have
There
given us
had
what,
to be
why does he
instruction
want
manual.
us here? Why did he put it in? Why did he put all this into place? He just did it because he had not,
Well,
because he was.
how do we
He
know
was
he wants us to know the answer? I mean, that he needs to
well,
give us a guide.
because
He might have.
design implies
Yeah.
purpose. Like you don't build a business
Yeah.
unless you have a reason you're building it.
But does that
Again,
mean the purpose is
I
given to you, or you have to find it, or could it be there's a
well,
purpose and we
my
have to?
point that I'm trying to make. One second, let me just say
Yeah.
this. That's why I did not begin with these proofs because I prefer the experiential one, the one that makes
Mhm.
things work well. Because
Mhm.
again, these proofs you can argue
Mm.
forever. You could
Yeah.
argue,
Fair. I
I,
appreciate that. Yeah.
and I don't right. So I don't want to make a case that I have it airtight. It makes sense to me that once you accept there's a God, it makes sense. There's a purpose. And God says, you know what? One of the purposes, build a healthy family, bring children into this world, make sure those children are virtuous and not selfish. That makes
Mhm.
sense to me. And I think most people would agree, even those that are not necessarily believers in the Torah, they all agree that we should have some moral code to
Mhm.
coexist.
Yeah.
Even radical evolutionary biologists say survival of the fittest. They just call it natural selection. That nature gravitates toward whatever is best for the species. They just say you don't need God for that. It does. It happens naturally. But let's be honest. Just replace the word nature with God, and you're talking about the same thing.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. Would you agree with me that like I think it's silly when people try to use the Bible codes to prove, and in fact it has the opposite effect to me because
It's
it's
a
like
little
someone's
like
trying to sell.
sensational. It's a little sensationalism, and I agree with you. I'm not impressed with it either.
Mm,
Um, to me, it goes like this. You know what? If you and I are good friends and we
mhm,
care about each other, and
mhm.
that's the basis of our relationship, then I show you a code that supports our friendship.
Yeah.
So fine, doesn't
Yeah.
so just
Yeah, I know, but
but
they did the same thing with Moby Dick, and they found the same codes in Moby Dick if they
right.
follow the same
So in other
principle.
words,
So
if the whole thing is
it makes
built
me
on
think:
the
is this whole
code,
thing phony? Is this phony? It's like if you're trying to use the Bible codes, but I can use it in Moby Dick. Are you lying to me?
that's why I agree with you. I wouldn't go with that direction. I
Yeah,
wouldn't take that because
right.
you could read anything into anything.
Yeah. But the experiential. So for you, it's experience. It's the fundamental truths in the Bible that present themselves in daily life.
A resonating truth. Yes, yes.
Like, can you give two examples?
Yeah, the building of a family, that the
Building.
best
Yeah,
thing for a human being is to have a family. And I know,
yeah.
I could tell you from my own psychological work, a child that has two healthy parents is more likely going to grow up with more confidence and more love and more self-esteem.
Yeah.
When a child is lacking that, so if the Torah, for example, said anarchy is the prime type of life, let's all kill each other, that doesn't resonate exactly. So I
Yeah.
look at things that work, and that's why I'm not surprised, for example, that the founding fathers, or for that matter, Christianity and Islam, saw these truths, and they, in a sense, built upon them and built the religion called Christianity or the religion called Islam. I see the direct parallels.
Yeah.
That's one example. I think also, especially when you learn the mystical, I'm very involved in the mystical and the psychological, spiritual teachings. There, it's very clear to me because there you start appreciating, the importance of love. What is love? Living a more service-oriented life instead of a selfish life. Today, we all can agree that these principles are true. We don't always live up to them because we all have our challenges, but there are certain ideals. I see this because in my work, I deal mostly with secular people, not with people like where I've grown up, my own traditional Jewish world.
Mhm.
And I see that certain universal
Mm.
principles we all agree upon. And frankly, I don't know if you know this, going back to what we spoke, I have hundreds of thousands of Muslims that listen to my programs. I'm not saying they
Wow.
all like what I say and they agree with, but I just got a whole email from someone from Pakistan. So
That's
because I like to talk about the universal ideas that we all share.
mhm.
We all want to have love in our lives. We all want
Mhm.
happiness. We want our children to grow up in a peaceful world. The things we want, the things that we have in common are far more than the things that separate us.
Hmm.
And so I'm always trying to focus on those common denominators, and that's where I see the real resonance of the truth. Because I don't see the Torah as a book for Jews. I see it as a book for the world. I see it as universal. Yes,
Where
there
is the
are things
common?
that talk about the Jews and talk about Jewish commitments, but the principles of love, of virtue. I said all of us are created in the divine image. Each of us has a unique and indispensable mission. I can go on and on. I mean, are you familiar with my book, Toward a Meaningful Life?
Yes, I've heard of it. Yeah, I haven't
So
read it.
that's a book where I capture in a book form pretty much these universal principles. It's essentially a chapter on every part of the cycles of life. I have a chapter on body and soul, on birth, on childhood, education, youth, love, marriage, pain and suffering, money. All the topics that we address, and I try to convey and distill Torah's universal teachings on each of these areas of life that we deal with, including
Oh.
social issues and theological issues.
You said you were a skeptic, or have you always been a devout Jew? Have you always been religious?
I grew up in a traditional Jewish home. My parents were both Russian born, but they came to the United States after World War II. And I grew up in the Chabad Hasidic world. That's the yeshivas, the schools I went through. But by nature, I'm wired as a skeptic. So to me, it wasn't a contradiction. I grew up in a very traditional home, but also a home that was, my parents are both very well read. I was open to many ideas. I met people of all backgrounds. My father
Yeah.
was a journalist. He's passed away a number of years ago, but he was a journalist. So I grew up in a home that was not dogmatic. So think of it that way.
Mm.
It was
Yeah.
committed, a traditional home, but not dogmatic. It wasn't imposed upon me. So I was able to explore. And I read. I was a voracious reader. I explored. I looked at all kinds of systems out there. I was very drawn to Far Eastern philosophies, Buddhism, and other schools of thought. But I ultimately found that Judaism had what I needed for my life. But at the same time, I completely embrace
Yeah.
and I am constantly in communication with people from different walks of life. I'm not, as I said when I said to you, you can ask all questions. I'm not a person that I'm not a parochial partisan type. I am
Mm.
proudly Jewish, and I state that. But that doesn't mean I cannot learn from and hear from different people of different persuasions, whether they're Jewish or not Jewish, and I find truth everywhere.
Amazing. And I think just to take it back to the original, and I'll let you go. Is I very much understand your view that Israel has to defend itself, right? And I guess like sometimes when I ask people like, hey, is Israel doing the right thing? The response I get is like, what about Sudan and what about Yemen and why are you focusing? And of course they have the right to defend themselves. And I'm like, hold on a second, like why can't I ask that question? Why Yuval Noah Harari asked this question uh, is it? I guess is it inappropriate to ask the question to question whether Israel's response could be too much? Yes, they're defending themselves, but 40,000 people have died. Why can't I say? Why can't I ask the question? Like, is this the right response? Is there a better way?
I am not a believer that you silence anyone. You can ask any question you like.
Yeah,
That's not the issue here. Of course, you could ask whatever you wish. The question is the issue here at hand. If I could analyze it, why some people may take offense when you do that is not because of your question, because it sounds like somewhat of the propaganda of the enemy. Because the
but what?
enemy keeps saying, because there are plenty of people who are anti-Semites, and they say we're
Okay,
not anti-Semites, we're
I
anti-Zionism.
I understand that.
So when you
I'm not an
say that,
anti-Semite,
so
but
so people have it
I'm not
would be.
anti-Semitic, and I hope you believe me. Like I'm not anti-Semitic. I'm
I don't think you are. I think if anything,
okay.
I would call you more naive than anti-Semitic. I would
Okay,
never
so
call you that.
let's go with that. I'm
No, no,
naive.
no.
I'm anti-Semitic.
I'll tell you the equivalent. You
Yeah,
have to remember that after the Holocaust, where
yeah,
6 million Jews were massacred, and the world was silent. The
mhm,
world was pretty silent.
yeah.
Okay, so you have to. So it shouldn't be surprising that if, let's say, we were right now middle of World War II, 1942, and we hear about the concentration camps, and you'll say to someone, the Nazis are the worst. We have to destroy them. But the Jews are also making mistakes. You understand how that would be taken, right?
Okay, so I wait. So I hear you're making analogies. I understand that some people criticize Israel because they're anti-Semitic. So, but I'm gonna I'm sitting here. I'm
Because
not
because
anti-Semitic.
because no, because
I want to
no, the
I
question
feel
goes all the
bad.
way.
I
And,
feel
and
bad about all the
let's say you're
yeah.
right. Let's say Israel made mistakes. So what's your point? That
No, no.
Israel should stop defending
Well,
itself? What's your point?
so just take my question at face value, knowing that I'm naive but not anti-Semitic. So I'm sitting here and I'm asking Rabbi Simon
I know
Jacobson.
you're not anti-Semitic. Let's make
Well,
that clear. I don't have any doubt about it.
let me ask my question. So
You'd not be
Rabbi
sitting
Simon,
with me and respecting me if you're
yeah.
anti-Semitic. I know that.
So Rabbi Simon Jacobson, I'm so disturbed by the 40,000 plus Palestinians in Gaza who've been killed in this war. And yes, I know people are dying in Yemen and Sudan. And yes, I know all about the Holocaust. And yes, I know that Iran wants to wipe out Israel. And yes, I know about Hezbollah. And yes, I know about Hamas. And in spite of all those things, I still feel bad that 40,000 plus people have died in Gaza. And so there's a part of my heart that wonders, gee, I'm not a military expert, but is there any way that Israel could be conducting themselves in a way that is not killing so many people? Like, is that a fair question to ask?
It is, but anyone with a little military experience would tell you that maybe you shouldn't be watching so much news.
No, no, no.
And
But it's 40. It's a lot of people. It's a lot of people.
okay, have you corroborated that number is correct?
I've
You know
looked
that
at
as a fact?
every news source. Unless the world is lying to me, I mean, every single news.
But news sources get their information from one place.
But I'm
The,
saying
the
every
Gazan
single
officials.
Israel.
Let's say,
It's an Israel source. Israel says that's the number.
my understanding is Israel has never corroborated that number,
So,
and
but you don't
they
believe any
challenge that.
number? Well, what
No,
number do you
no,
believe?
no.
What should I
What
look at?
happens if you 1 second? But if Hamas is the controlling government in the Gaza, so when you hear Gaza officials say that 40,000 were killed, why aren't you skeptical? Maybe those same
I
Hamas
am, and that's why
that
I look
raped
at
women
every
are
other
giving
news
you a
source in the whole
number
world.
because the whole world's getting information from the same source.
So, who do I believe? You? I mean, who are we supposed to believe?
Anyway, I don't necessarily believe it. You don't. You believe whoever you want to
But
believe.
what number do you believe? What number do you believe, and where do you get the number?
It doesn't make a difference to me. That's why I don't. Doesn't bother me.
How many people are dying doesn't bother you.
No,
But what?
I opened up this discussion that bothers me
Yeah,
every
that you
time
do care. I know. Right.
a man, woman, and child dies. Let's not forget.
But what I'm saying is, it's
Hold on,
not.
no, hold on, one second.
You say
Don't put words in my mouth.
no. I don't want
I
to. I don't want
said
to put words in your mouth.
clearly. No, why would you even say something like that when I said at the beginning of this program that it bothers me? Why would you even, what, you think I don't remember what I said?
No, that's not at all what I want to do.
Okay. So let's make this clear. You know, the Nazis told the Germans that the Jews are vermin. And the children in Germany began to believe that Jews weren't human. They were like rodents. And let's say you're a German child, and they say, why shouldn't I be? All the newspapers in Germany say that the Jews are not human. They're like vermin. And they'll say, every newspaper. And the answer is yes, when you control the newspapers, you can say anything you like. That's called propaganda. So, number one is, I think there's a lot of propaganda, much more than we all can imagine. I don't know the numbers because I wasn't in Gaza and I didn't count them. I'm skeptical about anything. Now, let me say this. There are people who say that October 7th didn't happen. So you're going to tell me, you think I care that newspapers say? I've seen plenty of things in newspapers that I don't think are always accurate.
How do we know what's true? Like, where do we go for the truth?
So let me ask you, that's a very good question. How old are you, if I may ask?
33.
Tell me, how do you find out what's really true? If someone comes to you and tells you
I'll tell you,
how do you find out what's true?
I look at trusted sources from across different sources. So
Is the
I
New
look
York
at
Times a trusted source in your opinion?
no. I'll look at dozens of sources to cross-reference and see what the common denominator is. That's how I find truth.
Yeah. But you know, there have been frauds in history, propaganda that everybody bought into, and then they found out the whole thing was.
So you asked me, so that's how I find truth. So let me ask you, how do you find truth in cases like this?
I'm very skeptical. To me,
I know, but how do you find truth?
Whenever you have whenever you have two narratives, I always know that there are too many agendas. You have the MSNBC narrative and you have a Fox narrative, right? They're very different.
Yeah, and they both say the same thing about the number of deaths, though.
Yeah, that's your response to me, and that you think so that makes it a fact because they both say it.
No, I'm lost. I'm lost.
Hold on,
I'm lost.
But they both also say that our sources are the same. It's Gazan health officials. That's the source always. Correct? Did anyone go and objectively count the numbers that you know of? I don't think anyone.
I don't know.
I don't think anyone would be allowed to go there even. So I don't even know what's going on in that regard. Second of all, let me say this to you. The discussion to me is troubling. I'll tell you why. This issue, because why are you, I will ask you this question. Why don't you have equal time about other atrocities? Why did you focus on this one in this conversation with me?
If you were an expert on Sudan, we'd be talking about Sudan.
I'm not an expert in anything. I'm not an expert in anything. I'm not a military. You're not an expert on that. But I don't think so.
Israel's near and dear. Israel's near and dear to my heart, and I'm
all these newspaper accounts that you're talking about. They talk about the equal time to the atrocities in other countries. Do you think?
No, they don't.
Why not? If they're such truthful sources,
they don't care as much, probably.
Why not? Why? Tell me why.
Because Israel-Palestine conflict is the most well-known, complicated issue in world history, and the U.S. is partnering with Israel, and it's people are fascinated by this, and they over-indexed on it. Now, of course, it's not a reason to say we shouldn't, investigate it, but it's given a lot of attention. But if I ask a question and someone says, "Well, what about this other issue?" It doesn't seem fair to me. It's like,
no, it seems fair to me. I'll tell you why it seems fair to me.
Yeah,
because it seems disproportionate. Why suddenly is the focus on Israel when Syria killed so many more of their own civilians?
Well, that's also terrible. That's also terrible. I mean, Bashar al-Assad, what he's done is horrible.
Yeah, but
he murdered his civilians. It's horrible.
When I see somebody marching, when I see someone marching for Black Lives Matter, but they don't march when a synagogue has been shot up and innocent people have been killed, I start wondering what their agenda is. Does that make sense? Am I entitled to be skeptical about that?
I would bet maybe they're more concerned about issues that affect them, is my guess. Yeah.
Do you think if the campus presidents on MIT and in Harvard and in the Penn State, University of Pennsylvania, had said when they were asked the question by the Congress, is calling for the genocide of Jews considered to be breaking the laws of your university? And they all answered, it depends on context.
There's anti-Semitism. There's a lot of
No,
anti-Semitism
I'm
in the world.
saying, had they said that about Black lives, the calling of blacks to be genocide, do you think they would have gotten away with that?
No.
So there is a double standard here. I think we can
Well,
all agree.
they didn't get away. I mean, they had to resign, I think,
No,
right?
that's true. But but it would have been a lot. The point that I'm trying to make is this. Let us even say 40,000 people were killed.
Okay.
And as I said at the outset, for me, even one innocent person dead is already too much. So that's very
Yeah,
clear to me.
and you have made that clear, and I acknowledge that, and fully,
I'll
yeah.
go a step further. The Talmud says, the Egyptians were like the Nazis. The Egyptians enslaved the Jews for 210 years, and they tortured them and they killed them. You know what happened when the Egyptians were drowning in the Red Sea? The Talmud tells the story. You may be aware of this. The angels began to sing God's praise. Thank God that the enemies are being destroyed. And you know what God says? My creations, my creatures are drowning and dying, and you're singing praise. You should be crying.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the Egyptians, we all agreed, were criminals, because we don't celebrate even the victor, even the death of our enemies. We don't celebrate death. We just don't celebrate death. We cry that human beings have fallen that far. As difficult as many people would find it I would tell you, I cry that there were Nazis in the first place that could stoop to such a level, and the only choice to deal with them was to kill them because they were just beyond the pale. So yes, I cry for every innocent person that either a bystander or collateral damage, whatever it is. And even though in war, it's true, civilians die, you still don't celebrate it.
Yeah.
We don't celebrate.
I didn't mean to
Hold on.
suggest
But
anything else.
let me just finish my point. The problem I have is that too much of the propaganda machine of the enemy is using, in the Wall Street Journal was an excellent article a few months ago. It's part of their strategy. Hamas does not have a military that can match Israeli military. We all know that, right? They can't fight head on. Part of their strategy is to martyr innocent people, and they don't have a problem to perpetrate the biggest war crime, which is to build a military brigade in a hospital or in a kindergarten or in a school. They don't have a problem with that. You and I have a major problem with that. Besides the fact that it goes against all civil laws, but they don't have a problem with that. What do you do with that? And they use that as a strategy. It's part of their strategy that they will embed. They say the reason they can't kill Sinwar, the leader of Hamas today, is because he surrounds himself with children and with hostages. So basically, if you have to kill him, you're going to have to kill all these people around him.
All the death, I just wonder, is it really helping Israel? What if ironically, terribly, Netanyahu is hurting Israel because he's creating more hate?
So here's where I don't agree with this. Scapegoating of Netanyahu to me is
not scapegoating. I'm just saying, what if it's the wrong strategy? Is it possible?
But you mentioned several times that you're not a military strategist.
I'm not.
So why don't you ask military strategists what they think?
Yeah, I should.
Why don't you interview one of them? I'm not a military strategist.
Yeah,
but why don't you interview a few of them, and that are not political? Ask a military strategist. What do you do under these circumstances?
You're right.
So that's what I would answer to that.
Yeah.
I personally don't think that public opinion, time of war, public opinion is not helpful. That's why you have blackouts and stuff, because the public opinion can be swayed. Other people with agendas can use it against, if you're going to bomb a city, you better not call the media there, because it's always going to be very gruesome. Let's be honest. War is bloody. Nobody wants to see blood. I think it's no matter what you do, it's never going to be pleasant. What can I say?
Yeah. No, and I apologize from before. I never meant to, like you said, put words in your mouth. I think what I said was, I asked you about the numbers. You said you didn't know, and then I think I didn't mean for this to come off the wrong way.
Fine.
I think I said,
don't worry. I'm an adult, and I can
Yeah.
protect myself. You don't. I hope you don't mind if you say something. I'm gonna call you
Please.
out on
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah. No, no, I absolutely.
I
So I
As you can
appreciate your
imagine, I've done this before. It's not
Mhm.
like I haven't been on. I've been live in very controversial
Ah,
settings and even with hostile audiences. So
oh,
you don't have to apologize. I told you from the outset,
okay.
nothing that you could say is offensive to me, but I will state my position. That's all I'll do. I'm not
I
going
think
to.
that the way that what the
I don't
bias I've
have.
been trying.
Listen. There's nothing you said that I have regrets for being with you on this program.
Oh,
Just
good.
make that
Okay.
clear,
That's
because
great.
what you're saying reflects actually what many people think.
Yeah.
I don't think you're alone in this.
Yeah.
Many
So
people do have these questions, and they need to be addressed.
and
So
let me
my
tell you
goal
where I
is not. I'm not trying to win a debate with you. I'm trying to actually open the
mhm,
conversation to bring as much perspective to it. That's all I'm
which
really
is
trying to
very
do.
very valuable. I grew up being taught that Israel was founded on this idea that it was a land for a people without a land, totally diminishing the reality that Palestinians who live there. I grew up being taught that the word Palestine was somehow inherently anti-Semitic until I learned that there's this whole other reality to it, and there are these people that call themselves Palestinians. There were people living there, and they have their version of history, and in some cases, they were uh, left their home, and so there's this other history of people that that have suffered it, and I feel like um, it's so important as Jews to acknowledge that that there's yeah, and I know you have, but
Well,
that's my
to be
angle. That's
to,
why I try so hard to incorporate this other narrative.
I was once on a program with a very pro-Palestinian presenter. I
Because
just want
I'm
to tell
pro
you
Israel.
what I said to him. I
Yeah.
said to him, the day, I hope the day will come. You have to
Hmm.
acknowledge that you and your people made a big mistake in 1948 when remember, it was the British that controlled that part of the world,
Hmm.
right? The British were pulling out, and that's when the UN made the partition. They gave Israel a few slivers, and they said the rest is for the Arab Muslims that are living there. Had the Arab Muslims
I've heard the
embraced,
opposite. I mean, I think the Arab Muslims were living there. The partition wasn't a few slivers. There were Jews living there, but Jews immigrated from yeah.
yeah, but there were enough Jews that the UN felt was worthy of giving them so they should have that
Yeah.
separation. If the Muslim Arabs had accepted that
Yeah.
peacefully,
Yeah.
without
Yeah.
any resentment, then what would have happened?
More peace. I think a lot of people don't accept when another people wants to come into their land. It's unfortunate. I wish they did.
Yeah, but there's a few things here. First of all, I think everybody agrees the Jews preceded the Muslims in Israel. They weren't there
In,
thousands of years ago. The Jews were. The Jews lived there. Jews always lived in Israel. Even when the Jews were exiled, there were always some Jews in Israel. And I mean, no one can deny that Jewish people have been praying
of
and
course.
saying next year in Jerusalem from how many
It's a
years?
hard pill to swallow if you're if you're Arab living there and you've been there for 5 generations and someone says, "Hey, get out of here. We were here first." It's a hard pill to swallow. You'll say,
Well,
"Hey,
you
my
know what?
great grand."
I wouldn't have told them to get out of here. I would say just let's live peacefully side by side. You know,
Yeah.
what do they say about the 2 million Arabs that live in Israel and are doctors and lawyers and judges and on the Knesset? What about those
Yeah.
Arabs? What happened with them?
I think in some cases they're given less rights than Jewish Israelis.
Well,
That's
not that
one
I know of.
thing.
Okay, I'd like to hear
Oh.
one right they don't have.
I know that they're not obligated to serve in the army. I don't know
Yeah, because no,
beyond
because
that.
it's against their conscience. Listen, if they don't want to serve in the army, they don't have to, because they may
Yeah.
say, we don't believe in it. But they're not. But there are plenty of them in the army, so it's not like they're
Uh,
not allowed to. Some of them are judges.
so they
Some of them are put
no.
Israelis into prison.
So they can't. I think they can't vote in Israel's legislative elections. To answer your question, it's my
One second.
understanding.
There's three Arab parties in the Knesset. They have
Oh,
power. That's not
so
true.
maybe this is misinformation.
Check it out. Check it out.
Mhm.
I've spoken to Arab citizens in Israel that are very happy, frankly.
Oh,
They wish
so
that their cousins would just stop. They
yeah,
say, now you could say, I don't want to be a minority in a country that's primarily Jewish. That's another story. That's like, um, there are some people who don't like that. Why should
Yeah.
we, 2 million Arabs, and we're living among 6 or 7 million Jews? But that's the reality right now.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate your time. Thank you for being generous with your time and for getting into this difficult conversation with me. So
I know
I hope to.
I, I, I'm happy to have done this, and thank you for having me.
Mhm.
It's a pleasure, honor, and I hope this message, as I don't know what the final product will look like, but everything I've said, I'm on the record. I'm comfortable with. So I hope
Okay.
it helps. The main thing, I hope it
Yeah.
helps your listeners.
Yeah. 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 And I'll have to think about um, if there's anyone else I could connect you with, or if I have thoughts on like if I were to invite you on, and maybe there's someone else that is more knowledgeable than me that could join us. But yeah, I really appreciate your time. And
But
I'll
I will
follow up
tell you,
with you.
there are situations where you have two narratives and they just cannot meet.
Hmm.
They just yell at each other. I mean, you see it. I see it on who does it? Pierce Morgan, I think,
Oh yeah, yeah.
and
Well,
others that they just yell at each other, and no, you go nowhere. You go nowhere.
yeah,
Um, I will
yeah.
just say this to you, that if I have any critique of Israeli leadership, is the other way around. I think that if there was a spiritual visionary that would
Mm,
really give a talk, a lecture, a global type of talk about the role of Israel and the role of Jews and how we look at Muslims and how we look at Christians, I think that would go a long way. I think
mm,
the right now the climate is all about war, who's going to
yeah,
win and blood and so on. But I think having a visionary leader would be very, very productive, because let the Muslim world hear a message from a true Jewish leader that is call for peace and a call for coexistence and a call for respect and to end all violence. Now, I'm not saying everyone's going to respond well to it. I think there are people who just can't put their arms down, but I think it would go a long way for the world to hear that,
yeah, yeah.
because I don't
Absolutely, I
see
agree
I
with
don't
you.
see anyone giving such a presentation.
Yeah, I'll try to find someone. I got to jump. Thank you for your time.
Okay,
I'll
thank
follow up
you.
over email. Yeah, thank you, Rabbi Simon
My
Jacobson.
pleasure. Be well. Much success.
Thank you. Thank you.